She's too old to notice. They laughed, thinking I couldn't hear them. But that night, I noticed everything. And what I did after, it changed all of our lives forever. That's how my story begins. My name is Margaret Ellis, but everyone just calls me Maggie. I'm 68 years old, a retired schoolteacher living in Charleston, South Carolina. For most of my life, I thought I had raised a good family. 2 children, a son and a daughter, who I loved more than my own heartbeat. I gave them everything, even after my husband passed away 15 years ago. But let me tell you something, growing old teaches you the cruelest lessons. It isn't about the wrinkles or the aching knees, or even the way people in the grocery store call you, ma'am, like you're already halfway gone. No. The cruelest part of aging is realizing the people you love most don't see you anymore. They see what you have, what you own, what you'll leave behind. It all began on a humid August evening, just a few weeks after my 68th birthday. My children had come over for dinner, along with my daughter-in-law and my teenage granddaughter. My house, the same white colonial my late husband and I bought back in the 80s, was filled with the smell of roast chicken and cornbread. I was in the kitchen, setting the table, when I heard them in the next room. They didn't know I was standing just around the corner. "She's too old to notice," my daughter-in-law whispered. My son chuckled. "Yeah, Mom's living in her own world these days. She'll never know." And then my daughter chimed in with words that pierced deeper than any knife. "Honestly, we just have to wait. It's not like she can take it with her." My heart dropped. My knees almost buckled right there, holding that tray of glasses. They thought I was too old, too blind, too naive to notice. But I noticed. I noticed every word. And that was the moment I realized my family wasn't waiting to share my life. They were waiting to share my death. That dinner was torture. I forced a smile, listened to their conversations about jobs and bills and college applications, all while their words from earlier echoed in my mind. "She's too old to notice, too old to notice." I've spent my whole life noticing things. As a teacher, you notice when a child is struggling even if they're pretending not to. As a mother, you notice when your daughter's smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. As a wife, you notice when your husband is tired but won't admit it. And now I notice something else. My family didn't see me as Maggie anymore. They saw me as a bank account, a will, a house waiting to be divided. That night, after they left, I sat in my quiet living room. The old grandfather clock ticked in the corner. My husband's photo smiled from the mantel. And I made a decision. I wasn't too old. I wasn't too blind. And I wasn't going to let them write the ending of my story. So, I pulled out the old metal lockbox from my closet, the one where I kept important papers. My husband and I had made our wills years ago. Everything was supposed to go to the kids, equally divided. It seemed fair at the time. But life changes. People change. And as I held that paper in my hands, with their signatures already waiting, I realized something. Fair wasn't always right. Fair wasn't always just. That night, with tears in my eyes and my hands trembling, I picked up a pen and wrote a note to my lawyer. A simple message. We need to change my will. Because if they thought I was too old to notice, they were about to learn just how much I could see. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The summer sun was already slipping through the blinds, lighting up the dust in the air. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. They were wrinkled, spotted from the years, but steady, not useless, not invisible. I thought about all the times I had sacrificed for my children. Times when I went without so they could have more. Times when I said yes, even when every part of me wanted to say no. I remembered the Christmas of 1991 when my husband and I could only afford one big gift. I had been dreaming of a warm winter coat, but instead, we bought my son that new bicycle he had been begging for. The look on his face that morning made it worth it. And my daughter? When she wanted to go to college in Atlanta, I drove her 8 hours there with my old car stuffed full of boxes, even though gas money was tight and my back was screaming the whole way. I gave. And I gave. And I gave. And now, they were waiting for me to die so they could take. I dressed slowly that morning, putting on my best blue blouse and a pair of slacks. It wasn't a special occasion, but I wanted to feel strong. I tied my gray hair into a bun, slipped on my shoes, and picked up the phone. "Good morning, this is David Ross's office," the receptionist answered when I called. David had been our family lawyer for decades, a kind man who had helped us draft our will all those years ago. "Hi," I said, steadying my voice. "This is Margaret Ellis. I'd like to make an appointment. It's about my will." There was a pause, then a polite reply. "Of course, Mrs. Ellis. How about this Thursday at 10 a.m.? That will be fine." When I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of fear and power. For the first time in years, I wasn't just sitting back. I wasn't just the background character in my own story. But before Thursday came, something happened that only strengthened my resolve. My granddaughter, Emma, stopped by with her mother, my daughter-in-law, Karen. I was baking cookies the way I always did when Emma visited. She's 15 now, all energy and eye rolls, but I love her dearly. As Emma scrolled through her phone, Karen leaned against the counter and said casually, "So, Mom, you've still got that big life insurance policy, right?" The question came out like a bullet. Sharp. Direct. I froze, the wooden spoon hovering above the mixing bowl. "Why do you ask?" I replied carefully. "Oh, no reason," she said, waving her hand with a fake smile. "It's just, well, with the mortgage payments and college coming up for Emma, it's nice to know there's some security." I couldn't believe it. She was already spending money in her head that wasn't hers. Money that only comes when I'm gone. Emma looked up from her phone then, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. Maybe she realized what her mother was really saying. But Karen? She didn't even notice. That night, I cried in bed. Not because of the money, but because I felt like a stranger in my own family. Thursday came. I walked into David Ross's office, clutching my purse like a lifeline. The walls smelled faintly of coffee and old books, and his secretary gave me a kind smile as she led me in. "Margaret," David said warmly, standing up from behind his mahogany desk. His hair was whiter than the last time I saw him, but his eyes were just as gentle. "It's been too long." I sat down across from him, and for the first time in years, I let the truth spill out. "David," I said, my voice trembling, "my children think I'm too old to notice. But I notice everything, and I need to make sure my will reflects that." His expression shifted from surprise to understanding. He didn't interrupt. He just listened the way a good friend does. "I want to make changes," I said firmly. "Big changes." And as I spoke those words, something in me shifted. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the mother waiting quietly in the shadows. I was Maggie Ellis, the woman who had built this family, who had worked, sacrificed, and loved fiercely. And I wasn't going to let anyone erase me. David leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He was quiet for a moment after I told him everything. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. "Margaret," he finally said, his voice calm but firm, "you've been one of my clients for almost 3 decades. I know you, and I know you wouldn't be here if this wasn't serious. Tell me exactly what you'd like to do." I took a deep breath, gripping the strap of my purse. I don't want my children to inherit everything by default anymore. Not after what I've heard, what I've seen. If they can't respect me while I'm alive, why should they profit when I'm gone? David nodded slowly. "So, what are you thinking?" "I want to leave the house, my savings, and the insurance money to someone who will actually value it, not just wait for me to die. I was thinking of setting up a scholarship fund, maybe even leaving part of it to my church here in Charleston. And Emma, my granddaughter, I still want her to have something. She's young. She still has time to grow. But the rest?" My voice hardened. "They don't deserve it." For a moment, I felt guilty just saying the words out loud. These were my children, my flesh and blood. But then, another memory surfaced, one I couldn't ignore. It was years ago, not long after my husband died. My daughter, Sarah, had called me one evening. She needed money to pay off a credit card. She was desperate, crying on the phone. I didn't have much, but I wrote her a check. Weeks later, I found out she hadn't paid off any debt at all. She used it to go on a trip to Las Vegas with her friends. I had swallowed my hurt back then, told myself she's young. She'll learn. But now, as I sat in that office decades later, I realized she never really had. And my son, James, when his business failed in Atlanta, I drained almost half of my retirement fund to help him start again. Did he ever thank me? Maybe once. But now, he could sit at my dinner table and laugh about me being too old to notice.
No.
Enough was enough. David nodded, scribbling notes on his yellow pad. We can absolutely make these changes, Margaret. I'll draft the new documents. You'll need to review them and sign when ready. Thank you, I whispered. My throat was tight, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. When I walked out of that office into the hot Charleston air, I felt like I'd grown taller somehow. Stronger. My cane tapped against the sidewalk, but it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like rhythm, like a drumbeat to a new beginning. But strength doesn't go unnoticed. The very next weekend, when my children came over for another dinner, I sensed it. The way Sarah glanced around the house, her eyes pausing on the framed photos. The way James asked casually, "So, Mom, have you been to see David Ross lately?" The fork in my hand almost slipped. "Why do you ask?" I said as calmly as I could. James shrugged, too quickly. "Oh, no reason. Just thought maybe you had some paperwork to update, taxes or something." I smiled, though inside my stomach twisted. They were suspicious. Somehow, they knew I was up to something. I changed the subject, but the rest of the meal felt like a chess game. Every glance, every word was loaded. That night, after they left, I stood in my bedroom staring out at the oak tree in the yard, the one my husband had planted the year our son was born. The branches stretched wide, strong and stubborn, still standing after storms and hurricanes. I thought about him, about how proud he would have been of me for standing up, for finally drawing a line. And I whispered to the empty room, "Don't worry, John. I'll take care of this. I'll take care of us." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim of my age. I felt like a woman reclaiming her voice. The weeks that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. I had signed the first draft of my new will with David, but the process wasn't complete yet. My children didn't know the details, but somehow, they sensed the shift in me. Maybe it was the way I carried myself. Maybe it was the silence I held when they spoke about money. Whatever it was, they grew restless. It started with little things. James would call more often, pretending to check in, but his questions always circled back to the same point. "Mom, you've still got the insurance, right? You haven't touched the savings account." Sarah stopped by one afternoon with a bag of groceries, which at first warmed my heart. But as she unloaded the food, she casually asked, "Have you thought about what you'll do with the house, when the time comes?" When the time comes. Like my life was already packed up in boxes. One evening, the tension finally snapped. We were all sitting around the dinner table again, me, James, Sarah, and Karen. The roast chicken was still steaming, the mashed potatoes untouched. And yet nobody was talking about the food. James cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk about the will." My chest tightened. I set down my fork. "What about it?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice sharp. "We know you've been meeting with David Ross. Don't bother denying it. Karen saw you walking out of his office last Thursday." I felt my face flush. They had been watching me, tracking me, like vultures circling. "Why does it matter to you?" I asked quietly. "Because," James snapped, "this house, your savings, it's supposed to come to us. That's how Dad wanted it. That's how it should be. Don't let anyone put crazy ideas in your head." My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. Crazy ideas? You think protecting what I worked for, what your father and I built, is crazy? You think I don't notice the way you talk about me when you think I can't hear? You think I don't see your greed? The room went silent. Sarah's face turned red. Karen muttered something under her breath, and James clenched his jaw. "You're being paranoid, Mom," Sarah said finally, her tone dripping with condescension. "We just want to make sure things are fair." Fair. That word again. It stung like salt in an open wound. I looked each of them in the eye. My voice was steady, even as my heart pounded. Fair isn't giving everything to people who don't respect me. Fair isn't rewarding cruelty and greed. If you think I'm too old to notice, you're wrong. I notice everything. And I will decide what happens to my things, not you. James slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this. We're your children. I stood up, my knees aching but my back straight. And I am your mother. Don't forget that. I gave you life. I gave you everything. And I am done being treated like a bank account. The words hung heavy in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Sarah grabbed her purse, muttering, "This is ridiculous," and stormed out. James followed, his face twisted in anger, with Karen right behind him. The door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the silence of my own house. I sank into my chair, exhausted. My heart ached, not just from the fight, but from the realization that the bond one thought was unbreakable, mother and child, was cracking under the weight of greed. But even through the pain, a fire burned in me. I thought of my husband again, of the oak tree outside. He had always told me, "Maggie, strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means standing tall after the storm." And I was standing. The next morning, I called David. "Finalize the changes," I told him. "Every last one. And hurry." Because I knew now, my children weren't just waiting. They were circling. And if I didn't act fast, they'd try to take control before I even left this world. The following week, I signed the papers. My will was changed. Final. Sealed. No more doubts, no more wavering. David shook my hand as I left his office. "You've made a wise decision, Margaret," he said softly. "You're not just protecting your assets. You're protecting your dignity." His words stayed with me as I drove home. Dignity. That was it. I wasn't trying to punish my children. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was fighting for the one thing I still had the right to control, my dignity, my legacy. It didn't take long for the storm to come. 2 nights later, James showed up at my doorstep. He didn't knock politely, he pounded. I opened the door to find him red-faced, his eyes burning. "What did you do?" he demanded. I stood tall, though my heart was pounding. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb, Mom. David Ross called me today. He said he couldn't discuss details, but he let slip that you made changes. Big changes." So that was it. Somehow, my son had pressured David's office for information. James stepped inside, his voice rising. "You're cutting us out, aren't you? After everything we've done for you?" I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done for me? Do you mean the way you mock me behind my back? The way you circle like vultures, waiting for me to die? That's what you call everything?" His face twisted, but before he could answer, headlights flashed in the driveway. Sarah's car. Seconds later, she came storming in with Karen trailing behind. "Mom, this is insane," Sarah cried. "We're your children. This house, your savings, it belongs to us. You don't get to just give it away." My hands shook, but my voice was clear. "It belongs to me. Until the day I die, it belongs to me. And I decide what happens after. Not you." The shouting went on for nearly an hour. Ugly words. Accusations. At one point, James even threatened to challenge the will in court. I sat there, quiet, listening, letting them show me who they really were. And then, just when I thought my heart couldn't take another blow, Emma walked in. She had slipped in quietly through the back door, probably drawn by the noise. She looked from her parents' furious faces to my tear-streaked one, and her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, understanding. "Stop it," she said firmly, her voice shaking. "All of you, stop yelling at Grandma." The room fell silent. Emma walked over and stood by my side. "She's not just money. She's not just a house. She's the reason we're even here. If you can't see that, then maybe you don't deserve any of it." For the first time, my children had no words. They left that night, slamming the door behind them, their anger echoing through the quiet house. But Emma stayed. She sat beside me on the couch, took my hand and whispered, I'm proud of you, Grandma. Tears filled my eyes. I pulled her close, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Maybe the cycle of greed and blindness would break with her. Maybe she would be different. Months passed. The tension with my children never truly healed, but I no longer feared their judgment. I had taken back my power. My will was locked away, untouchable. And when I walked past the oak tree outside, I felt a strange peace. My husband's tree had stood tall through storms, and now so had I. So, if you're listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Growing old doesn't mean growing invisible. People may think you're too weak to notice, too frail to fight back. But they're wrong. We notice. We feel. And sometimes, we make choices that shock everyone because we refuse to let others write our ending. That night when they said, "She's too old to notice," they thought they were laughing at me. But what they didn't realize is, that was the night I began noticing everything. And because of that, my legacy, my dignity will never belong to them. It belongs to me.